we've just started this art care fund because there are many artists in our country. Many of them are very, very, very talented, but they don't get that kind of recognition. I know some people in the art world have not been able to take care of their medical needs. So we have started this Art India Care Fund for all the artists. They come and apply to us. We have a small advisory board, and we try and provide in whichever way we can for the artists. These are the restoration projects that JSW does. As you know, India is a vast country, and India is an age-old, ancient civilization. But the government tries their best, but it's still not as much. We have many monuments. Government has to do many other things. And JSW and maybe a couple of others, we do this private partnership with the government to restore our buildings. I will tell you about the JJ School of Arts, which is where we have done, which JSW Group is restoring, has restored the School of Art before and after. Then is our synagogue, which is in Mumbai, which is totally dilapidated, which JSW has restored. We are also helping CSVMS, which is India's premium museum. We are doing one Max Miller Bhavan, which has been again restored by JSW. We are also restoring the Mughal gardens. We all have a lot of pride of the Mughal gardens of Kashmir, and now we see we are trying to restore it. We are also restoring the Kamlapur Archaeological Museum in Hampi. So as I say, with the heritage, art comes along. I think the whole circle of culture has to be fulfilled.
Thank you so much, Sangita. And that, as I say, these are quick kind of flashes of what people are doing. So, Kamini, would you like to talk through some projects?
Okay, so when we talk of the multi-hyphenate, I think it requires us to place collaboration really at the heart of the institution. And in today's context, I think it's not a choice. Museums, if they have to collaborate, if they want to survive and to thrive. And so I thought I'd talk about a project that I was fortunate enough to work on while I was at the CSMVS, or formerly the Prince of Wales in Mumbai, which was India and the World, a History in 9 Stories. So the exhibition really was a collaboration between the CSMVS in Mumbai, between the British and the British Museum in London, and the National Museum in Delhi. And India and the World, I think, was a landmark project. To begin with, just conceptually, because it really looked at, for its time, it looked at placing objects from across the world in dialogue with one another, focusing on the intercultural exchange that took place over centuries between nations and how that enriched their communities and their cultures. And it chose 9 significant periods in India's history and then looked at what was happening across the world at the same time. So exploring commonalities while celebrating differences. But I think what was unique also about this was the kind of holistic approach it had to collaboration. Because all museums kind of reach out to each other. To have an exhibition, you do loan from each other. But this looked at collaboration in terms of sharing ideas, resources, skills, personnel. And just remember that this project happened in the pre-pandemic times. Now everyone jumps onto a Zoom call. There are whole projects being done online. But at that time, beyond a Skype call once in 2 months, I think that whole concept was unknown. So it was really bringing 2 whole teams together across time zones, across geographies, to produce this exhibition. So there was a curator in India, Naman Ahuja. There was J.D. Hill in London. I was a project manager. There was Rosalind Winton in England. And then there were all these teams together, creating, how do you curate a show? How do you choose the objects so that they are all talking to each other? How do you create all this text? There's a huge amount of text for an exhibition. There was the catalog, there was the text and the labels in the exhibition, which was multi-layered. There were 3 layers of text. There was the book for children. So there was so much of learning that was going on back and forth between us, so much of give and take. And then we had another 30 institutions that were part of this exhibition. And there again, I think it was a question of opening up, not just loaning objects, but opening up friendships, because there was so much of support that was shared between the institutions. And one example was how we restored a work. The CSMVS had a great conservation team. And we had borrowed a work from the State Museum in Hyderabad. And they had this beautiful 2,000-year-old limestone sculpture from Amravati. And it had actually once been stolen, broken into 5 pieces so that it could be smuggled out easily, and then was retrieved and restored and put back into the museum and actually embedded in a stone pedestal. And then it really wasn't at its best, so the team actually removed it from that, restored it so beautifully, and actually even the rusting rods inside, which held all those 5 pieces together, were replaced with fiberglass. So it was that our way of respecting someone who had loaned such an important object to create a wonderful exhibition. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. And you can still get the catalogue because it's a fantastic sort of seminal exhibition. Now, Manuel, would you like to talk through what you're up to?
Thank you so much for having me, having Louvre Abu Dhabi. Thanks to India Art Fair. Each time I come back to Delhi, and especially for the fair, I'm bluffed by the energy and what's happening. So it's a pleasure being there. Not super original, but I will talk about the Louvre Abu Dhabi. If you can send a few slides. It's a wonderful museum which opened in 2017, and we are a universal museum. We share a DNA with this exhibition. India and the world, we would be even more global because we are telling a connected history of art throughout 10,000 years of history, and we cover all civilizations, all places in the world. Out of the 4 pillars which makes a museum, the first one being the architecture, we are a museum deeply rooted in its territory in the heart of the Arab world, in the capital city of the UAE, United Arab Emirates. The architect is French, Jean Nouvel, Pritzker Prize, but he's contextualized. So he really went to the source of the beauty of the Arabic Medina, of the souk, of the filtration of light that you can have in the oasis, like Alain. And he made this contextualized architecture, which is really sort of universally understandable, but completely in its territory. You see, we are on the sea on 4 sides. This is beautiful, and this dome is also a reference to the Islamic architecture and so on. So, totally contemporary, but at the same time rooted. Second pillar, the collection. So we have artworks from all over the world. Special relationship with the French museums. It comes with the name Louvre. We have access, but also a collection which was developed in Abu Dhabi, and special relationship that we built, friendship with many countries in the Arab world, with Seoul, with the Philippines, with Mexico, with African countries, and I hope one day we will do the same with our Indian friends to show also artworks by rotation. So it's a semi-permanent museography where we move the artworks all the time, but always telling a connected history of humanity, not cutting it, but using the chronological order to explain. This is one of the fantastic loans we got from the Louvre, Pixie, so it's a very small and beautiful ivory box, one of the masterpieces of Andalusia. You see, so when you walk through the galleries, it's like if you were walking through times, and instead of the usual, maybe the Western model of the Universal Museum, where art history classified by, like in a book, by chapter and so on, we are playing on what is actually one of the traits of the Arabic culture, which is the storytelling. So we are connecting and we are telling the story of time and the story of history. If you move to, this is, India is of course there, a beautiful dancing Shiva from the collection. If you go and we show the religions, all the religions together, which also, if you think about it, in the art of the Arab world is fantastic. If you move to I'm just taunting you to come and to visit, so it's just, I will not comment all the slides, you have to see by yourself. The third pillar will be the public. We welcome, you mentioned 1.4 million visitors last year. We have people from all over the world, residents, Emirati, and people, the 200 nationalities calling the UAE their homes. We have, of course, tourists visiting huge numbers from all over the world. India is always in the top 3 of the nationalities visiting us. And finally, and I will stop, the last element is the four pillar of a museum, the staff. It's a transformative museum. It's a museum. I'm glad I have part of my beautiful staff with us. More than half of the staff is Emirati. The rest is a mix of the UAE with people from all over. A few French, but except for that, the mix of the UAE, strongly Emirati and talking to the world. And I think this is also this capacity to look at globalization in a confident way, knowing where you are. That is the strength of this beautiful country and this beautiful museum. Thank you.
And Emiko, do you want to talk about what you're up to, the sort of other side of the world?
Well, thank you for including me on this panel, and I love this idea of the multi-hyphenate. Let me start by saying that, first of all, I've been with the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco only for about a year, although I have been working in the larger museum ecosystem for 30 years or so. So I included a couple of projects at the Asian Art Museum in the slideshow, including, a guest curatorship that brought many works of Asian contemporary art from around the world into conversation with our objects of more historical Asian art in our galleries. Also a more recent project by my colleague who's in the audience, Dr. Padma Maitland, who organized what turned out to be both an exhibition and a series of workshops and dialogues, in part because of the interruption of the pandemic, inviting Asian artists to submit videos on the theme of hope and what comes after that in the aftermath of hope. So I've included those projects, but I guess in the context of this particular panel, I wanted to introduce the idea that the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, first of all, is an unusual construct within the United States museum ecosystem. We're one of very few museums dedicated to this idea of Asian art. It was founded by a single collector donating his collection to the city of San Francisco, so we're a civic institution as well, so there's another connection there. But in part because of the way this particular, Avery Brundage, this particular collector collected, the context in which the city voted to fund the building of a museum and acquire this collection as world treasures coming to San Francisco, there were some problematic constructs that came out of that, and the museum and the way that it displays art even today. I feel like we're at the precipice of change. And even the construction of my job, this idea of experience and all the many ways, including digital, that the museum exists in a greater community than San Francisco, in a world community, and the need for partnerships. Our permanent collection galleries are the heart of our museum, about 20,000 objects, so we're considered about a medium-sized museum in the United States, and we welcome about 200,000 visitors a year, so nothing close to, some of the great European museums like the Louvre. And our galleries are still arranged in this geographical, regional construction of China, Japan, India, etc. and also because of the way that Asia was constructed, the idea of Asia was constructed in the United States in museums, in large part coming out of the Great World's Fairs, Philadelphia in 1876, Chicago in 1893, St. Louis in 1904, where commercial interests and the presentation of the material products of countries shaped the way that museum collections were formed. And Japan being one of the biggest displays at these expositions, the story of Asia has tended to be very East Asia-centric, even in museums like ours. And I think there's two opportunities that we're looking very seriously at, and why, this is my first time in India, my first time at this fair, but why coming here is so important for us. We've only recently opened up to contemporary art of any kind. This happened only in about 2015-ish, I think. So we have almost a very tiny collection of maybe 200 contemporary objects. And I don't think that we have told the story of Asia in an adequate way. And it is impossible for an American museum to talk about the narratives of South Asia without South Asian partners today. Just absolutely impossible. And part of an ecosystem of philanthropists, other museum partners, collectors, scholars, curators around the world. So I'll stop there.
And that leads on to something I want us to unpick a bit, and it's a sort of very hot topic. We've had a number of fantastic books come out about this idea of interpretation. And, for example, the Benin bronzes, they're not bronze at all, but that was named because of sort of classical preferences by the British. With interpretation, it's something that you sort of, with a collection like yours, but also with the Louvre, with the idea of this partnership. Manuel, you must get it a lot. People trying to unravel the relationship between France and Abu Dhabi. When you're presenting objects, how do you acknowledge these sort of tricky pasts, or as Dan Hicks says, the brutish museum? And also sort of respond to institutional critique. And I suppose, Manuel, I'm going to start with you.
On the first point, just to clarify, Louvre Abu Dhabi is a UAE museum, so I'm actually working for the Department of Culture and Tourism of Abu Dhabi, which has a series of museums, Guggenheim Abu Dhabi being one of them, soon to open the Zayed National Museum, Natural History Museum, Team Lab Phenomena, and many more sites and heritage. So it is a special relationship with France, which comes with the name of Louvre, which means in our museum world, it's the biggest museum of the world, the most known, the most, not necessarily the biggest collection of the world, but in terms of footfall it is. So when you put the capital city of the main emirate of the UAE and Louvre, you have the capacity to tell from the Arab world a new connected history. In the way we put artworks and we present them, the insistence is on the universal connectivity. So we explain the provenance and so on to answer part of this question, but we also insist a lot on the common points, the exchange, the roots of transfer of ideas. Sometimes it's common points that would come from anthropological traits. For instance, we show golden mask at the beginning in the first room, which are funerary rites that you find everywhere in the world, everywhere, where gold as a precious material to sublime death. So this is an anthropological trait. It's not the people traveling or the artwork traveling. It's our species which is doing that. But when you move and when the world gets more and more connected, you saw the artworks traveling, you saw the forms, you saw the imitation. We have beautiful artworks. Maybe, for instance, between India and the Western world, how the material will travel, come back, exchange, inspiration, transmission. So we show the object also because they're beautiful and because they are sources of inspiration. So by having this chronological thread, this is how we can show and help people understand and process how this connection unfolds into time. We're not saying there is a beginning and an end or a destination, but we're saying that you can understand how the historical, factual sequence happened.
And Kamini, do you want to speak a bit about a project that I'm very fond of yours, Museums Without Borders, because you did unpack a lot of these problems in a very, I would say, in a very fantastic and sympathetic way would be the word I'd use.
So I will draw on my former experience in my role at MAP. And at MAP, when I was there, we were really looking at an alternate language for young people as well. And how do we speak the language of the digital native? And we looked at technology as an alternative to provide people with alternate ways to access art. And so the project that Cleo was referring to, Museums Without Borders, was a digital initiative that MAP had initiated along with museums across the world. So it was conceived actually during the time of the pandemic when objects and people couldn't travel, and we said, why don't we make them travel virtually? So and I can see young Ria there and Kushi, both of whom worked with me on this project directly, actually. So the project looked at juxtaposing an object from the MAP collection with an object from a partner museum. And when you place objects in dialogue, as you can see earlier, you get some really interesting conversations. And these would be articulated by the curators from either side, and they could be based on differences or commonalities in geographies, in time periods, in themes, artists. And I think the idea really was, in a world where there is such a lot of strife, let's look at how we can connect with across cultures, so that we find what we have in common and we're able to understand each other. So I think it was very important from that point of view. So I don't know if you can see some of them, some of the images of Museums Without Borders. And one of my favorites actually was when we contrasted the work, which is not here unfortunately, but we contrasted the work of Jangad Singh Shyam, who was a pioneer of the Gond Pardan art movement in India. And we contrasted his work, his shimmering owl, with the work of an Inuit artist called Kenwake Shavak. And it was just a wonderful way of looking at different approaches, but how the mode of expression can also be so similar. They're all talking about similar things. There was the owl and the peacock, which told us their stories in different ways, and there was that same common spirit and the desire to express, to be human, to look at nature for inspiration, which was wonderful, I think, about.
Can I just interrupt for a second to say that I've only been with the Asian Art Museum for 1 year, and at least every other month somebody asks me why we can't be more like MAP online.
That's brilliant.
We did a wonderful collaboration with you as well, right? Yeah. And 34, I think that we are running at 34, right? Collaborations, Kushi, across, 35 now. Okay, so wonderful. It's good.
Yeah. It's looking good. Yeah, and it is really fantastic, because what I also wanted to talk a bit about is this idea. So we're talking about the majority world, and that means that your audience base could potentially be absolutely vast. But there are barriers, like, understandably. And I wanted to sort of think about how you're overcoming some of those obstacles to entry, because, the digital is one thing, but you all operate in physical space as well. and that can prove a huge disadvantage, actually. So, Sangita, do you want to talk a bit about, with your work, maybe how you sort of try and encourage the biggest number of audiences to engage with Indian culture?
Well, as far as my work goes, I'm waiting for the big museum to come. But as I know now, we have some exhibitions that I do, which I have used in my Hampi Art Labs, which is our residence program. And of course, many of my artwork, I give it for, like the Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, one of my paintings at the KNMA. So I think what I feel, besides this point, is this whole idea of this art fair and having these kind of talks. We try to meet people of different parts of the world, and more friendships come, and something all comes together. I was speaking to the people from the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, and if there could be a kind of a cross-pollination between India and Abu Dhabi, and we have exhibitions, we have some projects, etc. Many of us in India are now are getting there to the Western world. Many of us are the Tates or MoMA or Met for collectors. And I think it's a global world. If we all work together, we have some kind of intersections. More and more people get that kind of, more kind of encouragement and inspiration.
Yeah. And Emiko, you sort of operate in a very specific context in America, in San Francisco. You have quite a large sort of Chinese diaspora, but also South Asian. So with you, are there specific things that you're doing also to sort of bring people over that threshold?
I'll be honest, we're struggling. And I think most U.S. museums are post-pandemic. Attendance across the United States is low, or lower, in any case, at many, many museums. And the Asian Art Museum, I think, there's this huge opportunity of the South Asian community, and it is the fastest growing immigrant community in the United States at large, but also in the Bay Area. Their location is maybe concentrated in terms of residency about an hour south of the city. And so we've struggled to just that 1 hour seems to be a barrier to getting people up into the city. And the image of San Francisco right now is not at its highest. So that has been a struggle for us as well. But I think in terms of how are we overcoming that, one of our board members and an important collector of South Asian art said to me in my first months of this job, Emiko, the museum has to earn it, has to deserve it. And we have to show a commitment. Not just one time with one exhibition or one workshop, but an ongoing commitment to this area of art, and also to connecting the past and the present. Again, we're late to the contemporary art scene, as if Asian art stopped in 1900. We had this sort of frozen in time situation because of attitudes towards collecting in the United States, and so we are trying to break through it, but without partnerships, collectors and so forth, like we don't have the collection to just draw from our own resources. It is mostly a historical collection. So I think we have to create series of exhibitions, series of partnerships with other institutions, online as well as in person, bringing actual works of art, but also more accessible means of accessing it, and we have to make that a priority.
Because actually something that, I sort of grew up in London, and one of the fantastic things is that museums generally for the permanent collection at least, you don't have to pay an entry fee. But in America, it's different. At Louvre, it's different. So that is also something that you have to consider. And Manuel, is there something that you've done on that?
Because indeed the entry fee is one of the potential barriers, not the only one. In our cases, we analyze all the segments that we want to welcome to the museum. And if I start by the volume, it's tourism, and this is about buses, pricing, connection, knowing, and it's a commercial approach to make yourself accessible. And we're doing it proudly in terms of volume. And then if you come to the granularity, you have how do you talk to the people of the land? How do you talk to Emirati? How do you make sure that the Emirati have owned this museum, which is their museum? How do you give the voices to the elders? We invite them to tell stories in the galleries. We have to talk to the young ones by being fun, by being active. So it's about numbers of strategies to trigger the interest and to give them the keys of the museum. You move to education. Education, again, it's about curriculum, about network, but also about buses and the little school kids who come. And you need to have all this range to be able to reach 64,000 school kids who came last year. Each one is a topic. And at the end of the granularity, and not in importance, but in complexity, comes the real accessibility. And I'm very proud that you are translating in a language the people of determination. How do you welcome them? How do you make sure that you are universally accessible? Something you have the physical accessibility that was integrated into the design, but you have the specific effort to share the content with all the challenges that you can find. And this is very important as well. So here you're talking about a lot of effort for a limited group, but we need to do it. And you have another group which is very important, is people underprivileged. How do you give access? And then it's not a question of price. The ticket is one of the elements, but how do you compensate? How do you make sure you welcome? If you work with workers, you need to make sure that you will welcome them with the nurture and water. But it's also about pride. And for instance, we had this program, which I'm very proud of, which we relaunch regularly with the taxi drivers. So we invited the taxi drivers to come with 3 guests. So it's not for free. So it's not only, it's free, which is good to have, of course, but it's you are the one to be the usher inside the museum. So we give them the pride, we give them the capacity to be the door to them. And so they love it. Each time I'm taking a taxi, they talk about when do you start it again. So it's this is very tactical, but this is a good way to empower the people who will use the museum. We have a scientific narrative, but we want everyone to be able to own it and to use it. I will just say, because you were talking on collaboration, just a completely different subject, but I should have mentioned on your first question. We just opened an exhibition on Africa called Kings and Queens of Africa. And we had the access to the French collection through the Musée du Quai Branly. But it was very important and absolutely critical that we also build strong connections with our African partners. We were very proud to have loans from Senegal, Nigeria, South Africa, and Ivory Coast, and we had a 3-day symposium with 30 colleagues from the museum in Africa to talk about the future of museum. And this is a way that you can have multi-layers, loans, exhibition, projects, curators and directors meetings, educators meeting, and this is the fabric of what we do. And I think small steps, exhibition, milestone, and this is where we can build. So definitely let's do something together.
On the whole accessibility idea, because accessibility, there's so many multiple levels of accessibility. You can talk about physical accessibility. And I remember that was something that we placed at the core in MAP, because if you go to museums across the world, they're much older buildings. I mean, these are huge temples of knowledge that you have to ascend the stairs to reach. And how do people with disability reach them? So, I mean, we were lucky it was a new building, so we were able to sit with the architects and our consultants, DIOP, the Diversity and Equal Opportunities Center, to see how it could be made accessible to everyone, not only with physical, but also with mental disability. That went to the website as well. And also for your narratives. What are the stories you are telling? How inclusive are you getting? And for us, we were looking at fresh narratives, because how do you move away from the art history canon that we'd inherited from our colonizers? So what are the stories? How do you tell people, how do you make your collection relevant to an audience today? So those are the connections that you need to make.
I just wanted to piggyback on what you said about accessibility, because the word diversity in the United States is becoming ever more fraught. But Darren Walker, the current president, about to retire, president of the Ford Foundation, has been quoted as saying, diversity is just about bringing down barriers and making things more accessible. And I think that there's the kind of accessibility that you're talking about with buildings, but there's also economic accessibility. And when a lot of museums are in a financial position of having to charge $25, $35 for entry, that just automatically eliminates the accessibility for so many people in the community. Yeah, and so how to address that is something that we're looking at as well.
Also, linguistic accessibility. I'm sure in India, with so many languages, in Abu Dhabi, with people coming from all over the world, so we had to develop 7 languages in the audio guide. We have guides trained in so many languages. We are trying to have mediation tools, education tools, digital, that are using a minimum of letters to be sure that we can, by the image, explain as much as possible, because we incorporated things in which you just zoom with your phone, you have the app, and the labels come in the language as you've chosen, to facilitate this accessibility to knowledge, which has to be there. And I'm sure AI will help us a lot. If it doesn't if it doesn't improvise too much,
I still wouldn't trust Google Translate, not yet fully.
We need to be a little careful on the learning. But if we manage to keep it at the right level in terms of multilinguistic, I'm sure it will be a level.
Yep. And sort of thinking about like collaboration. So we've sort of gone through like a wide range of topics, but I wanted to ask you all, what are the sort of most successful collaborations you've seen? Because I think there's an assumption that collaboration is always a good thing, and that is really not the case if anyone's worked on collaborative projects, because, I know we're a connected world, but we're all culturally very different. Like, people have different ways of approaching it. We see it in all levels of the museum in this discussion. What have been the sort of most successful collaborations you've been involved with? Kamini?
Well, many of them, but maybe I can talk about Mindscapes, actually, which I thought was very nice. Well, I felt very strongly about it, and I thought it was a great collaboration because it was initiated by the Wellcome Trust. And it was almost prescient in the way, because they thought about it just before the pandemic, and we met them in 2019. And this was a project that looked at the intersection of art and mental health. And this happened just before the pandemic. And then how much mental health became an issue during the pandemic. But it looked, and it wanted to create this worldwide. So it chose 4 museums in different parts of the globe. So there was Gropius Bau in Berlin, there was the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo, there was the Brooklyn in New York, and there was MAP in Bangalore. And so while we were looking at this whole idea of how can we use art to promote mental well-being, it also looked at the language around mental health. What are the kind of words that we are using? And I think the ultimate goal was really to influence policy. That, of course, is a grand ambition. But the cornerstone of the project was really an artist residency in each of these institutions. And in Bangalore, we had Indu Anthony, who worked with Anganwadi workers, who are actually frontline workers who work with health and well-being for women. And the idea was, what about their own well-being? So she actually created these spaces where these women could come in and, just be at leisure, have a bit of rest, talk about the problems that they faced and that they felt here was someone to listen. So she took a little shutter shop in an area called Lingarajpuram, so where which is a troubled area. And all the women would come together and they would actually they would take pieces of cloth and embroider on them the kind of stories that affected them or their problems. And this was all created into a giant skirt. And ultimately the whole residency ended in an exhibition that we had at MAP. And there was a wonderful engagement, I think, between the women and the artist Indu Anthony and the museum. And Indu used her experience of interacting with these women to create a whole lot of artworks. And the women had such a sense of ownership over the whole project. So when we actually had the exhibition at MAP, they all came in and kind of took people around and did walkthroughs talking about this exhibition. And I hope, in the larger sense, that we had even workshops around it. So we looked at other groups of people who were suffering, for example, workshops for neurodiverse children, for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's, for marginalized students. So there were many aspects to this project. You're not going talking endlessly. So.
No. And Sangita, with your work sort of across the world, can you pick up on something that you've sort of been partnered on, a collaboration that for your foundation has been particularly successful?
We just worked with Kirsty McLeod for the Red Dress Project. So the Red Dress Project is a woman in London who so this beautiful red dress, and all of them. Is there a picture of red dress? So basically, they all have different panels. So one of the panel is done by the handloom weavers. The other is done by other craftspeople around Karnataka. And in London, they have worked to the mental health people. And then they all get together. She goes to every country and they create a red dress. And that red dress is a kind of a symbol of the health of a person. Health means a mental health, the problems that they face, the exhilaration. So we worked with them, with Kirsty McLeod, and I believe it went to different parts of the world. This is one collaboration that we are doing in Hampi Art Labs.
Oh, amazing. And Manuel, is there something that you, out of your catalogue of things?
Collaboration is by design the very nature of Louvre Abu Dhabi. So the collection. So we have the name Louvre, but we have access to all the French museums. So all the one you know the room after the Louvre is Musée d'Orsay, after Pompidou, Asia, you need Guimet. The rest of the world, you need the Branly, the Royal Collection, Versailles, etc., etc. So we have all of them, but their role was at the beginning very strong. Now they're going step by step down. They're still on very important pieces, but less. Our collection grew, and we have this ambassador object program, which was very important. First with the Arab world, many museums from. We have a two-head statue from Jordan that is a long-term loan. Very beautiful way of reminding the importance of the Fertile Crescent in the history of mankind. And most recently, two very beautiful collaborations. One was with the Filipino Museum of Ayala. You have 700,000 Filipino in the UAE. It's one of the, and we had no artworks, not from the French collection, nor from our collection. No. And so we went to the Philippines, to Manila, and we discussed. And one of these golden masks is actually coming from there. And it was a moment of pride for the Filipino communities. On the Filipino traveling to the UAE, we multiplied by 3 the number of Filipino visiting the museum and owning it. We just had beautiful relationship with INA in Mexico, and we now, if you come to the museum, because you will come, you will be welcomed by 6 tons, 3 meters head, Olmec head, which is incredible. These artworks only can be presented if you have a special relationship with the country, and it's a pride of them to be in Abu Dhabi, and it's important for everyone in this part of the world to understand the pre-Columbian civilization, which were fantastic.
I would like to add that in India, there are very different demographies from Abu Dhabi, Louvre to India. In all the museums of India, it's always full. You look at CSBMS, you go to the National, I just went to the National Museum. So I think there are lots of people in our country, because we are a large country. And people from the rural areas, they come to different cities and they go to all the museums. But if you look at Louvre Abu Dhabi, I've also went to this beautiful AI museum in Jeddah. I've also seen the museums in Dubai. The thing is that you have beautiful, beautiful museums, and you have lot of support by the government and the people. And I think you get lots and lots of funds and support compared to our country, India. So I think it's different demographies. I think people is not the issue. Support is the issue. In India, it is the support of the philanthropists, the private sector. The government in India has thousands to do. They have many things to handle. Hospitals, roads, lots of issues. Whereas other countries of the world, which are very, very rich, I think government support is very important.
But it's also in the way the government articulate the priorities, which is, for me, important on the UAE, is the vision and the decision, because it's a decision that culture and education matter as infrastructure. As you need roads, you need hospital, but the putting it in the core priorities is extremely important.
Although having said that, in 2023, the Ministry of Culture did sign an MOU with France to help develop this new sort of mega museum that's happening in the north and south wings in Delhi. So let's hope that there will be something fantastic happening. And thank you all for joining. If you'd like to talk to anyone, I'm sure people will be here to talk to you. And I hope that you have a very good rest of your time at India Art Fair.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for an erudite conversation. Thank you for being so patient. May I request all the panelists for like one photo with the title slide, and a big round of applause for my translator right here, please.